Well, good afternoon, everybody. I have been honored to have the opportunity to meet Hank Keith in person today. He is the Chief Financial Officer for Westminster Communities of Florida and been in that role for 28 years. So you all may be more familiar with his annual visits that he gives to provide a financial update. And from what I understand, it is a valued communication and one that I am very proud that we have. And I will take this opportunity to turn it over to Hank and to give the presentation. Thank you, Hank, for being here today.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I can see I'm almost a sellout crowd. I guess when you make less seats, it makes it easier to do a sellout, I guess. So, but welcome. I want to welcome everybody who's watching it on the video at the same time. I'm sorry that you had nothing else to watch on TV and ended up having to watch this video instead. So there's nothing else exciting on. So I met with your finance committee earlier this morning and then your resident council at lunchtime. So a lot of days of meeting here. So as Brian said, my name's Henry Keith, or Hank Keith. I've been with the organization 28 years, pretty much the chief financial officer that entire time. I've been in the industry for about 35 years. I am a CPA, which makes me very exciting to listen to. I am a Florida native, actually an Orlando native of almost 59 years, and I graduated from the University of Florida, which is okay to say at Jillington, but not so good to say at the Oaks in Tallahassee. So for a little bit for our history first, because I think it's important for our financial update. We have been in business since 1954. Our first community opened in 1963 in Bradenton, Florida. We are a family of communities. We brought in Jillington. We were added to the family. I believe it was number 8 on the list when we brought Jillington into our communities. We have 10 continuing care retirement communities. That includes Westminster St. Augustine, who we bought in October of 2017 out of bankruptcy. We have 12 HUD-related communities. Those are all rental communities, mostly all low-income residents in that communities. We've only built 3 of our 22 communities. So almost all of our communities have been some kind of a turnaround, financial turnaround for us. And also, some of you might have met Terry Rogers. We have a new CEO, effective April 20th, I believe it was, 2020. He has over 30 years of healthcare experience, and I believe over 22 years of experience in our industry alone. So he's been on board since April 20th, so we've been spending a lot of time training him onto the Westminster ways of doing things. And he's been changing our ways a little bit, too, at the same time. So to good, though. So a financial update. I will take us through June. The audit has been released. I'm not sure if it's in your library. Is it in the library? Probably is. Not sure. We need to get it there to the library, so I'll make a note. We've always placed the audit in the library for the residents to read. It's usually always there because nobody ever checks it out, and so it should be there if it was brought in. So let's talk about occupancy. Occupancy is very important for financial health. If you look at the NIC, which is the national group that looks at occupancy for senior living communities, average occupancy for a continuing care retirement community, or a life plan community as it's called now, was at 84.9%. We're currently at 90%, which is very good. But pre-COVID, we were at 95% occupancy over all levels of care. Independent living, nationally 87.4. We're currently at 92.3. This was as of last Friday. Assisted living at 82.1, we're at 87.2. And skilled nursing at 80.2 nationally, and we're at 85. Actually, skilled nursing started to go back up again this past Friday, so which is good to see. We do expect residential living to slip some more down because of our lack of move-ins, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. So most importantly for us, as of June 30th, is cash or reserves. I've told you who listened to me in the past, we've always had reserves. I always figured the reserves for a nice little recession that would come through or something like that, but never planned on a pandemic. I'll just go ahead and tell you that. I don't think anybody ever did plan for a pandemic, so we had not. But fortunately, we have very strong reserves going into the pandemic, and they've actually grown during that time. So we've actually seen our reserves go up about $20 million because of our investment portfolio, which we're very pleased to see. We currently have about $81 million of unrestricted reserves that we can use in case things continue to decline for our entrance fee sales. We also have another $57 million in our minimum liquid reserve account. So for those of you who remember, the minimum liquid reserve is a reserve that's required by the state of Florida. It's in Chapter 651 of the Florida statutes. It's basically 15% of our operating cost, 15% of our accumulated depreciation, and 1 year's debt service that we're required to have a reserve. We can invest those reserves, but it's monitored by the trustee. They're all held by a trustee. And with the new changes to Chapter 651 this past year, it's even harder to get the money out. So we've never had to request the money coming out of 651, out of the minimum liquid reserve. I don't see that any need for that at any time, at the present time. But if we ever did, basically what we'd have to do is we have to come up with a plan and give that to the Office of Insurance Regulation. They would look at the plan, probably make some adjustments, and then allow us to take out the money at that point. But we'd also, as part of that plan, have to put money back in. What's the plan to replenish it to that point? I just don't see it with the $81 million of unrestricted reserves we have in addition to the minimum liquid reserve. We do have restricted gifts reserves of about $23 million. Those are gifts that people have given, residents have given to us mostly. Said you don't use it for this purpose, benevolent assistance, cultural endowment, those kind of things. Then we have endowment funds. The endowment funds are currently at $27 million. The largest reserve of that, endowment of that, is $16 million for benevolent assistance. So it's a very large reserve. We incur about $1 million of benevolent assistance expense each and every year. Not at Julington, but company-wide, so over our 10 CCRCs. So unrestricted cash investments as of June 30th was $177 million. As of March 31st, it was $166 million. It has gone up since June 30th. It went up another $10 million going into August. So still very strong. I just checked my phone a few minutes ago. I saw the market was still very strong today. The S&P is hitting 35, might hit 3,600 here pretty soon, which is just phenomenal, so to say the least. You know, but what happens if that reserve, if the S&P were to finally go down or the markets go down? Because they will bump down. If they did, we also have a $40 million line of credit that we do not use, typically have never used. We've only used it once in 20 years, and that was to buy a community in Orlando, Florida. So that's been repaid since then. So we have $40 million available for the line of credit. The board of directors has given me permission to use up to $15 million of that for capital projects if needed. At the present time, we haven't needed those funds, but it is available if we need to. Our investment return during that time, during this last 3 months, has been about 14.6%, which is great because if you remember, for our budget philosophy, we do not budget for investment income, mainly because I don't know how to budget for investment income because the markets go all over the place. Or somebody makes a tweet or threatens to shoot off a rocket somewhere and the markets go all crazy going forward. So we've really never budgeted for investment income. And we've never budgeted for contributions. We receive about $2 million a year in contributions, but we don't know when they're coming in. Our largest contribution was about $16 million at Westminster Oaks. It was a gentleman who worked for UPS. And my first question was he a driver for UPS and had $16 million to donate to us? Because if his answer was yes, I was going to put on a brown suit and start driving a truck. But he was an executive for UPS for a very, very long time. So our financial performance for the first 3 months of June, well, remember our year end is March 31st. We had operating revenues about $41 million. Our budget's about $43 million, so we're under budget in revenues, almost $2.5 million. Operating expenses were under budget about $2 million. So we were off budget this year. Most of that is dealt with occupancy. We had budgeted early occupancy more in the mid-90s, and we're operating just at 90. And skilled nursing, obviously operating in the mid-80s, is not helping at all with that either. But overall, we're positive for the year, $2.4 million for the first 3 months, which is good to see. So we probably expect a margin this year of about 5 to 6% operating margin. With a goal, our goal budget-wise is about 3 to 5%. So we're still doing fine on that. And with occupancy starting to rebound, we should be okay. So skilled nursing revenues were down 9.4% compared to last fiscal year. That's a lot. That's the most I've ever seen in my career here. Residential living actually up 2.7%, and that was mainly due to the annual increase that we did on April 1st. And assisted living was up 4.9%. Some of that was the increase. Some of that was a slight tick up in occupancy we had during that time. So total operating revenues are down about 2.6% year to date. Most all that is in skilled nursing. Skilled nursing is down by itself, 2.1 million. We're down a lot of patient days, especially Medicare patient days. Medicare pays us on average about $525 to $535 a day, versus other payers, we're at about $220 to $235 a day. So big difference when we don't have our Medicare patients coming in from the hospital. Operating expenses, skilled nursing and assisted living are down about 5% compared to last year. That's mainly because if you know the health center is based on a nursing ratio for direct care. Our budgeted nursing ratio is about 3.73. We've been operating at about 3.86. We had to raise the ratio up because a lot of you know we had to create the ATU units for those Medicare patients coming in, those isolation type units. So it required a higher level of staffing for us. But still, overall, our ratios have dropped. Our number of occupants, the required staffing for those levels have been able to adjust to meet our occupancy. Other operating expenses down about 8.1%. We have not furloughed or laid off any employee. Okay, I just want to make that clear. We have not furloughed or laid off anybody. And we haven't done that in 28 years. So very important. I know I apologize to our board because if you remember last year I was asking for a small recession to curb off the unemployment market. I promised them I would never ask for that again because they gave me a depression instead of a recession, and it appears much longer than I wanted. But it did fix the labor problem, so temporarily. So we will see labor picking up, and we'll have a good story to tell to our current employees and our future employees. You know, where were you when COVID happened? Did you get laid off? Did you get furloughed because you were working at Disney? Because you were working at hotels? You were working at some industry? And say, look, we're here, we're always going to be open, and we're always going to be consistently open. You're consistently going to have a paycheck each and every other week. And I think that's going to be a strong message as to hire back employees going forward. We're going to keep this position. We're going to fill back staff as needed. Where we think we need it, as occupancy levels start to rise, we're going to start to refill those positions. We really need to do that. It's very important that we continue to operate in a positive operating margin. If we brought back all the staff right away with those occupancy levels, what would happen is you'd be looking at a much higher than normal increase April 1. So our next increase is April 1, as those of you know been here for a while, all of our increases come on April 1. We're not going to do any special assessments, any increase in your rates before then. We're going to do our usual annual increase. I don't expect it to be anything but the normal increase, which is probably what the employees will get on average. So I do not expect a high increase at all. That's probably one of the biggest questions we've had from residents, is how we're going to pay for COVID. And it's not going to be through a monthly fee change. So it'll be the usual one we did, probably somewhere between 2 and 4% going forward. So that's all I can tell you now. We're just starting our budget process going forward. I am concerned that somebody's going to have to pay for all this. As you well know, I'm sure you've thought the same thing yourself. So I see property tax rates going up, which will impact the community. But I also see personal taxes going up and probably even sales tax going up. Fortunately, we do not pay sales tax since we're a not-for-profit in Florida. But for our residents, they do pay sales tax, and you do pay federal income tax. So who knows where that's going to end out. But that's just my personal belief that somehow this has to be repaid. It's just a matter of who's going to be paying it. So I'm not going to get into that big debate here, but somehow it's going to have to be paid. So I think that's going to be more of an impact on our residents. I don't see Social Security being impacted. To be perfectly honest with you, it's too heavy of a voting question that won't come up, and I don't think they'll impact Social Security at all. They might change the ages when people can retire or get full benefits, but I don't think they'll change any of the benefits that you're getting going forward. So we talked about operating expenses. One of the big items that's very unusual for us is we're actually under budget for utilities, almost $700,000. And it's been bugging me to death. I was like, did we misbudget this thing so poorly that in 3 months we missed it by $700,000? And I believe what's happening is we're not using all the common areas like we used to. So all the air conditioning, they had to crank up the air conditioning. And we hoped the air conditioning would come on today. It probably hadn't been used that much. But I think that's what it is that we're not using all these common areas and having to cool down these very large spaces as we used to before. Because this is usually when we're over budget, because these are the hottest months. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues on as we start to bring programs back on. After that, some of the usual items are under budget. Recruitment expenses are under budget because we're not doing a lot of recruiting right now. And the other big item is advertising and marketing. We're doing that all on social media, which is extremely inexpensive. We're not bringing potential residents in for functions, serving food, those kind of things. We're doing it all virtual, either on Zoom or phone calls or whatever it might be. So much more inexpensive to do it that way going forward. CARE grant funds, you probably heard about those, or let me go back. The PPP funds, you remember you heard about that, all those kind of things. We did not qualify for that because we were too large. Our companies are all related by common ownership, so we were too large to receive the PPP funds, which was fine with us because there's some paybacks on those. We received the CARE grant funds instead. They're for skilled nursing. We received $4.2 million in funds to date, and another $1.1 million just last week. The $4.2 million does not have to be paid back at all to the United States government. I hope so. I'm interested to see how that works out long term. I'm just kind of a nervous person when it comes to free money like that, so we'll see how that works out. One of the things that shows how you used it is how is your budgeted nursing revenues going into the pandemic been compared to your actual revenues. So that's how we've been recording it. So we've been recording, if we're under budget, $3 million in nursing home revenues, we recognize $3 million of the $4.1 million into income going forward. We also pay for our special PPE supplies. As you can imagine, we've been buying a lot of masks, a lot of special supplies, and that's been about $400,000 to $500,000 this year, company-wide, in PPE expenses, up and above our normal expenditures. We received another $1.1 million just a couple days ago. That is for testing, the test that we'll have to buy, because now we're going to be testing our employees and our skilled nursing residents a lot. It's going to be worse than your days in school when they tested you all the time. So it's going to be a lot of testing going on. That money can be used for that and for staff time to actually administer the tests going forward. So I don't think $1.1 million will go very far with testing. The current tests we use are about $40 a piece. I'm hoping they'll go to what I call the National Football League test, which should be about $4 a test. And I believe it has a 30-minute turnaround. Brian, is that right? 30 or instant?
15 to 30.
15 to 30-minute turnaround. So hopefully we'll be able to go to that going forward. So overall, we had about $3.2 million from operations, about 7% margin, which is very good. Entrance fees received, though, $5.5 million. About 50 entrance fees out of 100 that were budgeted. So we're way down on sales. The problem with that is that historically, we turn over about 13% of our residential units each year. That means if we had 1,000 units, 130 units will turn over naturally each and every year. That figure has been amazingly consistent from year to year. So you figure we're going to turn over 13% of our units in a year. We have to refill at least 13 plus more to get back to mid-90s, where we were at 94, 95%. So I see our residential occupancy hopefully leveling off at 90 going forward. But our marketing staff are going to work very hard to accomplish that. It's kind of hard to sell an apartment when it's hard to visit it. So as you know, only hot prospects, if you might not know this, only hot prospects who are ready to move in, that's when they get to see the units. They don't get to see the apartment if they're just kind of thinking about moving in. They have to do a virtual tour for that. So we need somehow to make that change. Maybe the faster testing will help with that going forward, and we can have more visits to the community. We are rehabbing all of our units. If those units turn over, we are fixing them back up. We do believe this pandemic will end, and we also believe that there will be a pent-up demand, and we'll need to have units ready. So units are being turned over. So if you see people working in the units, that's what they're doing. They're getting them ready for when this ends going forward. You also notice you have a lot of capital improvements on your campus because of the infrastructure project and some other projects, but for the most part, capital projects have been skimmed down to very just minimal projects. All repairs, air conditioning maintenance, air conditioning replacements, roof replacements, All those kind of things to keep the buildings operating are still happening. We have curbed off the big projects going forward. The two major projects we have going were already started during the pandemic. Were Baldwin Park, where we're adding the final phase of 76 units there. That's in Winter Park. And then Westminster Shores in St. Petersburg. Their 50 units had already started, so that will finish up in July. Baldwin Park will finish up in December, 1st of January. Westminster Oaks Memory Care unit, a separate standalone building, is already under construction there. That should open in July at the same time. Your Memory Care will start somewhere between December and January in this next year. So not this year, December of this year or January of 21. So that will be started. And that's on the property on the north-south part of Orange on the west side of the street. So that's where that's going to be located going forward. It's basically going to be a copy of the Westminster Oaks Memory Care. But that is in the process. Also, too, we're getting ready to do a bond issue here in St. Johns County for $108 million. Westminster St. Augustine, if you remember the old Glenmore facility we bought in October of 2017, has done extremely well. They've sold all of their apartments and all of their villa homes, so they have no inventory to sell currently. Their occupancy in skilled and health center is still pretty low. In the low 20s, they have a 30-bed health center and a 30-bed assisted living. They operate around the 22 beds each with residents. They're doing extremely well, so we've decided to bring them into the obligated group, refinance their existing debt, which was at 5.5%, down to a rate just below 4%. And that will save them almost $1 million a year in interest. So they will become part of the obligated group on September 28th. They will become part of it. So that doesn't mean any of your money or any of your capital improvement money is going over to them. They're just becoming part of the obligated group going forward, which was always the plan. The plan was 5 years, though, not 2.5. So they have just turned around really, really well. Those bonds will be issued. They'll be priced on the 8th and then close on the 28th. It'll be about $108 million. As part of that, there's $50 million of construction funds. Half of those construction funds are going to St. Augustine for additional units, and the other half of those funds are coming to Julington Creek for construction. So part of that will go to the memory support building and then to apartments, probably more Southwood-style villa units on that property on Orange Avenue on the west side. You know, we own all those lots up to the medical office building and down to the one gentleman who won't sell his house till it's worth a fortune. And there's that one house we don't own at this point. So, but that's kind of the plan right now for Julington. So capital improvements, we've spent about $11 million to date. We are budgeted to spend about almost $18 million. So we're about $7 million under budget in capital improvements. We expect that to continue. I've been told the new capital budget will contain a lot of COVID-related items that we've learned during COVID. Air conditioning systems, things like that, that probably need to be revisited. Skilled nursing that has to be revisited. Those temporary isolation units will probably have to be made permanent, is what we're talking about doing. So we might be taking some beds permanently offline going forward. We're not 100% sure, but we're 90% sure that we're going to be taking some units offline. So we're going to be looking at a lot of projects like that related to COVID and continue to look at capital projects just for normal maintenance of the communities. So as I look over all the financials of Westminster, like I said, we've been in business since 1954. Fitch, you know, we have a Fitch A- rating. As part of that, they rated this current bond issue at A- stable. So we've maintained our A- stable, which I'm very happy to say. It's difficult to do during a pandemic to maintain your rating. But they've always liked how we do business. We reinvest a lot back into our communities. We're operating with a positive operating margin during a very tough time for operations, so very pleased with that. We have $81 million in unrestricted reserves that we have not touched yet as part of the pandemic. $57 million in the minimum liquid reserve if we ever needed that. We still have that $40 million line of credit if we ever needed that. So we will definitely be able to wait out this pandemic, which I really don't see fully ending till the end of 21. So going forward. So that doesn't mean a lot of things aren't phased into that point, but I think up until 2021 we'll still be facing some kind of pandemic going forward. All of our communities are located in strong markets. I'm amazed as I drive through, I come off 210 and drive up through whatever that neighborhood is to get up the racetrack. And I haven't been up here in a while, but it's just like, how many more homes can they build through here? And I look at World Golf Parkway or International Golf Parkway, that whole street, I drove that street today, just homes coming up out of the ground everywhere. And all down Racetrack, is there going to be any trees left on Racetrack anywhere down that road? It's all the way to 1 now. It's just amazing. So it's a strong market here. We have strong markets in all of our communities, so we're very fortunate with that. But we're also spread out through the state, so we're not just relying on one market. We have many markets to look at. Our revenues are also diversified. Some of you know we have our own pharmacy. That pharmacy will be diversifying the revenues. We'll be trying to get more residential residents to participate in our programs. We will have mail order, things like that we can also fill as part of that. And then we do have home health. We have our own home health in St. Petersburg, and we'll be looking to expand that. It's not a Medicare home health. It is just a companion care type home health. And we continue to be good stewards of your funds. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the time on the video, the people who've been watching the video, and I'll be happy to take any questions. If you wait for the microphone to get around so we can make sure we get it on the tape so people can hear it, we would appreciate it. So any questions for anybody? While you think about your questions, I would tell you once again, we do not expect any major rate increases come April 1. There'll be no special assessments between now and April 1. There'll be nothing like that going forward, okay? So it's going to be somewhere between that 2 and 3, 4%, somewhere in there, just about like it was this past year. So mostly related to salary increases.
Hank, I'll take a question, or have a question for you. I'm not a finance man, but as I heard you explaining today, I think at independent living level, we said, and let's just use an example, $2,000 a month assessment, we, until recently, were not able to use hardly any of the exercise facilities. They, restricted other services, not against maintenance or anything, but they got a lot of vacant positions they're not filling. So I look at it, my insurance company, auto insurance, home insurance, is reducing rates. Mm-hmm. And they're acknowledging that people are going through this period. Maybe some of it is emotional, maybe some of it really is, actuarially speaking, reduction in cost. Mm-hmm. But as I heard you talking in here, we have, and the only thing I hear is what you just said is don't look at anything more than 2 to 4% increase. I'm thinking just the opposite. Why aren't we at least flat, if not less than, our operating or if you want to say annual, but at least our monthly assessment fees? Could you help explain that? Because I've heard you talk about development, you've talked about reserves, you've brought in a lot of, it's a very positive what you gave, and I'm sitting saying we're just continuing to do that money and get less services.
Less services will not continue forever, okay? We've already talked about bringing more on. Visitation is now starting. You had your fitness centers partially back, dining rooms been partially back. All of those are following those guidelines. So we don't plan to operate like this forever. We like to get back to where we were back in February, where we have all the full range of services that you bought into, that you've had for many years. We're trying to get back to that. We believe by April 1, we can almost get back to that point. Now, as far as services that haven't been rendered, we have talked about possibly some kind of credits going forward, but we will not address that until this pandemic is truly over. It's just not financially responsible to hand out credits when we don't know when this thing's going to officially end. We're guessing, we're hoping when it's going to officially end, but to answer your question, some of our staff have left on their own. Some of our positions, like maintenance, is doing security work, which I understand is now being filled by a security company. That'll be very soon. So the maintenance staff will be back to full bore. Housekeeping is not quite back to the full level it needs to be, but we need to get back to that. And we want to get back to that before April 1 when we talk about rate increases. And it might be lower to the 2%. It really might be. I really can't predict it right now. I've never had to budget during a pandemic. And that's the problem. It's new for me too. And I'm pretty sure it's new for all of you at the same time. So we've heard that. You're not the first resident who's asked me that question. It's a good question. And I just don't have, the best answer I have right now is we need to continue to look at it and be financially responsible because, number one, we need to outlive you. And that's what we're trying to do. Yes, we do have strong reserves, but we need to make sure we're financially responsible. So we will look at that as we get further down the road. But the goal is April 1, hopefully we're back to 85, 90% of the services you were being provided before. That's the hope. So and that's what Gary and his group in operations are trying to do, is get back to where we were. Because I assure you, Gary Hennis, our COO, is very tired of his 4 Zoom meetings a week that he has with all the staff and once a week with the residents. So he wants to get back to less communication for a while and get back to operations and the stuff we were working on and all the capital and projects that we had planned. We need to get back to Julington here and start the redevelopment of this campus, so going forward. So we have a lot of things we want to get back on, but unfortunately we hit a roadblock and we have to wait out this pandemic and make sure everybody's health and safety come first.
Testing.
Robert Thomason, Southwood. You mentioned in passing, in addition to the memory care unit planned for Orange Avenue, other residential units like Southwood on the rest of that property. Is that the next movement? And what happened to the assisted living development that was planned by that our redevelopment committee was in conversation about earlier?
Right.
And then just to get my other perpetual question in here, is there any consideration being given to having a designated reserve fund for those who will receive money when they leave the community because of interest fee payment plans, so that it's not part of the general reserve? It's one of my pet peeves. Everybody knows those are going to happen at some point. That money's going to be due, and it seems to me it ought to be in a designated reserve for that purpose and not mixed with the rest of the reserve funds. So
Okay.
where is that again?
Okay. The first question has to do with the redevelopment. The land on Orange Avenue came as kind of a surprise to us as it became available much quicker than we expected. It's a good opportunity to build a memory support unit out at that area. The plan is still to come back in here, build the assisted living and the lifelong learning center first, okay, before any apartments or this building is being taken down, okay? Because we've got to build back the common area and make sure it's large enough to handle the units in the future going forward. So that's the plan. The assisted living and the lifelong learning center, kind of an L out in the parking lot out here. So that's still the plan. Remember I told you Baldwin Park is under construction, opening in January. It'll have, if everybody moves in, which we expect, about $27 million in entrance fees that don't have to be repaid, and another, at Westminster Shores, we have another $23 million in entrance fees. So a lot of that cash will be available to start the reconstruction of this side of the campus. So, but to warn you that the reconstruction of this campus has one little hiccup. The county still is going to battle us on the historical structure. So we've been playing kind of a, yeah, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, but we really haven't gotten into it and had you have public meetings, all that kind of stuff. Because remember, this was a Frank Lloyd Wright student building. So that's part of the issue. So we believe we're in the right. We have the right to do our redevelopment over here, but we still have that fight. And I don't know how long that could take. It could be a short fight or it could be a long fight. I just don't know at this point. So the other question was on the reserve. For those of you who bought in and had the estate preservation reserve, that's where you had either 90% or 50% of your refund would come back if you ever left the community, either on your own or were carried out, however it might be, that would go back to your state. That is not put into a separate fund. Okay, that is not held as a separate fund, never has been. I can't recall a community that ever has done that, mainly because we have resold all the units, okay? We've been able to resell those units, and generally we do pay those refunds within the 90 days. We always have. In my 28 years, we've always paid those refunds in 90 days. So we don't feel it's wise to put those monies into a restricted reserve. And if we did, it's about $40 million that means we only have $41 million of unrestricted reserves today. So about half of our reserves would go for that. So that would mean if we really got in trouble and the pandemic lasted out to 2022, sorry, I'm moving on the cameraman back there, what would we do? Could we go ask the guaranteed refund people, you need to give up some of your refunds so we can fund operations? What will the answer be? No, no. We've been very successful selling units. The contracts for guaranteed refunds actually allow us to refund upon the resale of the unit, and we have not done that in 28 years. So now, why he brings up that point? Because Glenmore couldn't pay their refunds. That's one of the reasons they got into trouble. And they still have $13 million today in unpaid. The residents are still there, still living, that haven't been paid out at this point. So it's a good point. We've paid every refund in the history that we know of in 90 days, and we're not that concerned about it. So I appreciate your perpetual question, and I'll get ready every year for that question, so thank you. It's a good question, because a lot of residents don't realize that it's not in a reserve by itself. So it's a good question. Anybody else? Well, you can watch it on video in case you have anything yet to come up from this or need evidence to use against me somehow in the future. So now that I'm on video, so just kidding. So, but thank you for coming out during this very odd time in our history.
Thank you.